Thank you so much, Dr. Wingfield. And we are going to move on. I have a couple of questions even for myself for you. We're going to move on to Dr. Michelle Rohrer, who is the Global Head of Product Development, Regulatory, and Policy at Roche. Dr. Rohrer works as a policy shaper dedicated to speed life-saving treatments for patients around the world. Currently, she oversees Roche's regulatory development strategies and policy efforts worldwide.
Thank you, Bettina, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. Karen, you're going to be a hard act to follow. I'm going to do my best here. So give me a moment, everyone. I need to share my screen to bring up my slides. So let me grab the slides here and hit present. And Bettina, can you see my slides okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. So as I said, it's a pleasure to be here with you all today. And now let me figure out how exactly I change slides. There we go. So growing up, I had two uncles, and you see them here, Uncle John on the right and Uncle Lloyd on my left. And both Uncle John and Uncle Lloyd happened to develop type 1 diabetes at the age of 18. So I had type 1 diabetes on both my mother's side and my father's side. To treat his kidney failure, my Uncle John received a kidney transplant from my father. And my Uncle Lloyd here on the left was really interested in all the latest technologies and was one of the first patients to use an insulin pump. Both passed away from strokes. And as I look back on my career, it was really this family experience that led me to a career in research and wanting to turn discoveries into benefits and health for patients. And I'm sure that you have these stories in your family history as well. It affects really all of us, doesn't it? This time in that how chronic disease affects all of our families and loved ones. Now, here I wanted just to take you into the world of clinical trial development as well as regulation. On the next few slides, I'm just going to hit on some of the many challenges that we face before I move on to 5 areas of focus for how we could evolve our current clinical development and regulatory frameworks for chronic disease. So there are a lot of great new innovations in the clinical trial and regulation space, but despite all of these innovations, we have a lengthening clinical trial process, as well as not much of a change in the regulatory phase when you look at time. And when you look over here on the far right, you also see that these trials are getting more and more expensive. And here you see a 2013 number of 2.5 billion. The latest number that Tough estimates is that new molecular entities cost 3.1 billion to bring to market. And now sitting on top of that is also that we're in a very risky business. We're more likely to fail than we are to succeed. And I don't know of any business that fails at the rate that we do, which is much lower than 50%, much lower than 20%, and in some cases, not even 5%. So in our line of work, failure is much more of a reality than success. The work that we do is hard. Now, to continue in terms of looking at the challenges, our world is getting more complex. And here again, you see a note from some of the research done by the Tufts Center for Drug Development. And you see that most of our trials are getting quite complicated, increasing the number of endpoints, increasing the number of procedures. Just look at the amount of data that we're collecting there. If you look on the 2005 to 2020, going from 494 endpoints to 3,560 endpoints, we are drowning in data. And from a chronic disease perspective, if you look at the number of IPOs that have occurred, We have a lot of IPOs. Last year was more IPOs in the biopharmaceutical business than any other year on record, with more than 100 companies going public. But look at what we're investing in. Yes, cancer, as Karen said so eloquently, is a chronic disease, but we're really not investing big time into some of the other major causes of chronic disease. You see this preponderance of our dollars going towards solving problems in the cancer space as well as the rare disease space. And to build on what Karen said, another challenge in the clinical development and regulatory space is, frankly, the absence of diversity in our clinical trials. 5%, as Karen said in her studies, is not diverse in terms of looking at a patient population. This is really not acceptable. And we're fortunate to have guidance and thoughtful frameworks and community outreach, but we still do live in a world where for our Black and Brown members of our community, for them to come to an urban center that is staffed largely with white people, this remains a very intimidating journey for them to travel from their communities through an unknown, possibly risky situation by having to drive through communities that they're unfamiliar with, to park in parking lots and venture into a hospital world that, let's be honest, has not done right by them in the past. And the memories of the Tuskegee experiment, as well as the forced sterilization of Native Americans, long haunts these communities in terms of their ability to trust individuals in the largely white healthcare ecosystem. So despite all of the guidances that exist, the challenges and that community outreach are all the more important in our world today. So let's continue talking about this, but let's look at some of the opportunities that exist. As I mentioned, the 2020 IPO shattered all records. We're living at a time now with the highest investment in the biopharma industry than ever before. There are more dollars going into turning discoveries into health and well-being. We're also investing in digital advances. There's never been a time when technology can so complement the therapeutic space here. And you see on the far right, a possible alternative reality solution to treat autism, and also digital endpoints like this standing or stride velocity ankle bracelet, which is being validated to replace the burdensome 6-minute walk test. So these digital improvements are just amazing, and all of the money flowing into the therapeutic space, both molecular as well as digital, really afford just awesome opportunity for advancements for patients. We also have a never before more mature regulatory framework. We have more countries joining the International Congress on Harmonization to assure a common regulatory standard across the globe. And we have regulatory flexibility that can also maintain high standards of quality, safety, and efficacy. And if anything, the COVID experience teaches us that a new paradigm exists where we can bring these solutions to patients faster than ever before. And yet, you saw that the costs are increasing and the time is lagging. So let's move on to these 5 areas that I'm proposing as places to focus to treat chronic disease. First, we need collaborative investment. We need this all-time high in investment in tech and biopharma to target chronic disease. COVID has taught us what's possible when we join together and collaborate, and we simply must fund targeted treatment for chronic disease. Second, we must look into early disease. We need to move more towards prevention and slowing disease progression. Our clinical trials and regulatory decision-making must enable studies which focus on changes in early disease to slow disease progression. And along with prevention, treating early is cost effective and has high impact on patients. But today we have to admit that most of our therapeutics are being developed for late stage disease. Third, we must insist and take accountability for diversity in our clinical trial populations. Did you know that the companies that developed the vaccines were held to account to assure diverse patient populations? Did you know that? The regulators came in and said, you have to enroll more diversity. And it's as a result of that holding to that high standard that you see these 40% inclusion of diverse patients in the vaccine trials. Now, how did that happen? That happened because sites were held accountable for hitting targets. And if they didn't hit those targets, they weren't allowed to enroll clinical patients into the vaccine trials. I know this from talking with other individuals with my jobs across the industry, that there are ways that we can include diverse patient populations. Even things like taking semis outfitted as clinical trial sites to the parking lots of nursing homes, doing things like that that are within our control, or including virtual telemedicine. We have many ways to overcome the challenges of enrolling diverse patient populations. And it's incumbent on sponsors and regulators to not just keep having the same result, running the same experiment and having the same result with 2% of our clinical trial population being diverse. We can do things. We have things in our toolkit that today we can take action. We also need to embrace innovative trial approaches. We have the ability, we know how to do more than just randomized clinical trials. We have many other innovative clinical trial approaches, which could be and can be considered for regulatory decision-making. And these include things that many of you may be familiar with, like model-informed drug development, adaptive clinical trials, Bayesian approaches, inclusion of novel and digital endpoints like that stride velocity ankle bracelet, platform studies testing multiple agents, use of external controls, as well as use of real-world data to validate and discern truth with regard to quality, safety, and efficacy. Now, we may see reluctance here, both from the investors as well as from regulators, but we absolutely must begin to partner together collaboratively to bring forward innovative approaches, because it's just not sustainable to insist on randomized clinical trials for absolutely every condition when we have these other perfectly valid, innovative approaches to use. And then lastly, to build on Karen's comments, we need to incorporate that patient voice. Within the US, we have the 21st Century Cures Act that led to meaningful effort at FDA and across the industry to build an infrastructure for patient-focused drug development. We must continue to partner with patients to further mature their voice and concerns being front and center in our clinical trial and regulatory decision-making forums. Certainly by using various digital health technologies, patients can participate in one or more aspects of trials without ever having to step foot in a clinical site. And I guess that's one of the benefits of COVID. You know, before we couldn't do telemedicine in a meaningful way in the clinical trial setting because there were laws inhibiting doctors in one state from giving counsel to patients in another state. But COVID has really leveled the playing field and implemented and fast forward our use of telemedicine and other digital ways of connecting with patients meaningfully. We certainly can consult with patients in our trial designs to really understand, is this doable for you? What is the burden with regard to all of these endpoints that we're collecting? And which of these endpoints are truly meaningful to assess your quality of life? So those are just my 4 areas of focus, or 5 areas of focus rather, for us to think about as we go about looking to improve the life of patients with chronic disease. This is a huge burden on our society as well as our families and individuals that we love. And certainly with the world and the knowledge of medicine being where it is today and the scientific advances, if we can put the rover on Mars, we certainly can do better for patients with chronic disease. And we have the tools at our disposal to make meaningful difference for patients. And I look forward to the ongoing conversation today with you. And thank you very much. And now back to you, Bettina.